Welcome back.
Hello, Paul.
Hi, Katherine. I have a question for you.
Okay.
You went on a sabbatical.
I went on a sabbatical. I did.
Is it really the first long sabbatical of your life?
No, not the first in my life, but the first in 15
well,
years.
Non-academic one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Okay. And so what happened during that time? How
What
did you come
happened?
Back? Yeah. Well, how did you come back?
So what happened?
What changed for you?
What changed? So this is so I took 3 months off, and first I went to Bali, and I saw those amazing rice terraces that there was a Long Now lecture about. But the really big thing that changed for me was in the middle going to on a silent retreat in Big Sur down at the New Camaldoli, which is a monastery about 20 minutes south of Esalen. And for me, did the thing that was the scariest, which was to be by myself and to be quiet. Some people would climb rocks and do other things to test themselves, and what I needed to do was that. And I faced some of the things inside me that have really been holding me back. And that's probably too private to talk about here.
Well, we'll just edge slightly away from that. But in terms, two questions. So, I mean, why is it scary? Why was it scary? The reason I'm asking that question is, I think underneath the surface, a lot of the world is scared right now.
Yeah.
There's so much fear, and fear is informing activity and demagoguery and rhetoric.
You are so right. You're so right. And it is a good segue from what we were just talking about. Well, I mean, I think that, my brain just flashed to a dinner conversation I had last night. And I think there's a connection, and maybe we'll help you, because some of what I was really thinking about was, really was more mortality, right? I mean, it's, what am I most scared of wasting my life at some level? And the preciousness of life, and getting to a different experience of it. And so I was having a dinner conversation last night about this incredible thing with these miners this week, and how the whole world was riveted by this, and why was it, and what happened in that moment. And our friend we were having dinner with said, well, it was like watching all those people be born. They just came out of the dark, and they were born, and the technology worked, and the community was there, and there was no downside. It was just joy. And there was something so primal about it. And I wonder if there's something primal in this moment that's beyond just the fear that so many people have, and the great pain that so many people have economically, that people sense that something else is going on. I don't know. You've been thinking about this for a long time. I mean,
don't we all? I mean, and Peter is here. Peter is saying how he's so optimistic, but the world isn't right now.
No.
And you've been involved with futurism, and before sabbatical, after sabbatical, before silence, after silence. In other words. And your background in journalism, and really in communicating, and really expressively, and so well, if I may say so, how to move, how to transform, how to change, how to look
right.
forward to organizations, more recently philanthropy.
Yeah.
Now that you've come through this, what do you want to express? I mean, who do you want to be after that experience? Because we spoke about this before, obviously I know about it, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
Boy, there's so much to say. I think the thing that would be good to talk about is community. So who do I want to be? I want to be able to be a present member of a community working on transformation, right? So, because I think that, I mean, you've said before that we're at this moment in history where we're moving from a place that's been about power and privilege to where, you know, your incredible book, Blessed Unrest. And you've also said, which I also feel we have what we need. We have the resources, we have the talent, we have the money, we have the energy, and yet we're so stuck to get through to the next level of the things we have to deal with. We're trapped in these systems that are, you know, not going to work in the world that's coming about. And when I think about the things I've learned in these years about, in any great business that I've been part of, or any nonprofit, or, you know, something like Long Now, every group of people that ever gets something done, there's a wonderful larger community that surrounds the thing itself, whether it's an idea or an organization or, you know, a movement. There's this larger community, and somehow we've got to get to the place that we understand what is the community that we're part of. I mean, so one of the things I spent time, you know, just coming to grips with after all this outside-in thinking, you know, of scenarios and stuff, I had a fully inside-out experience of just saying to myself, you know, just an ordinary human being, just like everybody else. I'm not better, I'm not worse, and isn't that wonderful? And what does that mean? Is my responsibility to be an ordinary human being now. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
was that a source of happiness for you when you?
It was yes, it was a great relief, actually. But there's something about figuring. You know, we just heard this wonderful, you know, set of things about the community of the Wikimedia. This amazing miracle that has come about. I worry about the limits of bottom-up change, but I just, how are we going to get unstuck, Paul? I mean, what gives you hope about that?
Oh, hope. You know, it's so interesting because I do public speaking, and I know that the expected payoff, you know, from my people hire me, or my audience is hope.
Yeah.
They do not want to hear you stand up for 40 minutes and then leave just completely depressed, you know. And I can do that pretty well, actually. And in fact, when I first wrote A College of Commerce, it was turned back by my editor and saying this is too dark. And I sent it to a reader who was in Alabama, actually, and Southern girl. And she was just reading the manuscript, and she said, you know, she would call back and say, Paul, I love your book, but I have to read the first 4 chapters in the sunshine. And so I realized that there is a figure ground contextual thing. Is like there is a lot of challenging stuff going on right now. I mean, we can go over it. We don't need to. Probably it's been gone over earlier today. But the thing is, how do you contextualize it? What holds it? You know, what is the vessel in which you hold the rapid deterioration of climate, of biodiversity, of the oceans, of equity, of income polarization, of the many types of violence that we don't hear about, which is the violence to the land and violence to the body through body burden and so forth. It goes on and on and on. And when we just dwell on the different aspects of how, in a sense, we're coming apart, we don't really have a way to hold it except perhaps community, perhaps religion in its truest form, not in its belief cult form, but in the sense of practice, you know, are those things that hold it. But the thing about hope to me is that I wonder if really hope is actually helpful, because hope is really kind of a mask for fear, and fear is a mask for hope. And some of they kind of go together. And I wonder if even hope is because everybody's always offering some new version, new brand of hope, you know. Not everybody, but I mean that's what the attempt is, and I'm wondering if that isn't sort of part of that, a different form of attachment, kind of a delusion, rather than actually just seeing things the way they are and saying, how interesting.
Yeah.
it is really interesting where we are right now. I mean, not that we would all agree. That's okay. In fact, we shouldn't. But just that if we look at the facts, at the data, at the dynamics themselves, I'll talk about the Chinese ideogram. May you live in interesting times. I mean, we do, but it is more than interesting. It's so compelling. And for me now, it's more about, well, looking at the array of things that are out there, we'll keep working on things that are worthy of failure instead of trying to endeavor to do things that are trivial. So I think it's a very...
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is... it's very interesting, all the happiness research. I mean, there is something so cultural in this country, the pursuit of happiness, the see on the bright side. And there's something, so many of the great entrepreneurs I know are great entrepreneurs because they refuse to see anything except, the worst thing can happen in a day, and a great entrepreneur stands up and say, well, it was great, so we're going to do it. It's just, that's how they keep themselves going. And yet, I think if we don't look with clear eyes at where we are, and one of the things that's wrong with our politics is that nobody can stand up and say that. They get creamed when a grown-up tries to stand up and say, here's what's actually going on.
So what happened to journalism where truth-tellers get creamed?
What's that?
Where truth-tellers get creamed. What happened? When did it happen?
Get me started on journalism. Oh, gosh. Well, journalism has, it isn't the journalism, it's the amplification of the messages, right? So the transformation that has happened in the last 20 years from the only way you could ever get a message out was through journalism to 24, to the now, the media has become the culture, right? So, and journalism is a shrinking part of the overall media culture. So what we actually have now is a kind of pornographic information culture, right? And so all any bad message gets so amplified, or it's the other side of the goodness of transparency. We have transparency absolutely run wild and crazy. And so I think we're seeing a bunch of unintended consequences of the technology as much as having to do anything with Stewart, I think it was in Media Lab, wrote, or one of the things he said in the 80s, when a new technology rolls in, you're either part of the steamroller or part of the road, and that really made a big impression on me when I was trying to think about the future of journalism back in the early 90s. But I think but the steamroller has taken a lot of other things with it as well, and some of the civility in the culture is part of it. A story I can't get out of my head right now in the last few months is just saw an old friend of mine who was the only journalist from the New York Times who did great stuff on Watergate. So it was a Washington Post story, and he was a civil rights reporter, and he worked at Watergate, and he worked on Watergate, and so he's a great investigative reporter and of that generation of journalists. And he's now retired, and he lives in Southwest Virginia, and he's on the board of a university, of a public university. And I sat at lunch and listened to him talk about how nothing could get done because you can't actually have a conversation in public, right? And you can't have a conversation in private either, right? And so the sort of sense of there's no secrets has also got its limits. Anyway, that's starting to be a rant, and I'll stop. What else is on your mind, Paul?
But you are a journalist. I mean, that is your training, your background, and a great journalist. So what are you going to do? Where do you
Well, I left journalism for a variety of reasons. I was pretty sure that the fate of journalism was going to be controlled by forces outside journalism and outside the journalism profession. So when I really started to understand the internet in 92, 93. So I thought, well, if I care about journalism, I'm going to start working on understanding those things and what the business model is going to be to support great journalism in the future, because the business model that used to support it is going to be killed. And then I realized that what we actually need in most is not so much to point out what's wrong. We need to light a flame under the things that can make it better. And the journalism is not the right vehicle for that.
What is the right vehicle?
I think it's people who, it's the kinds of things that you've done. It's starting things, it's ideas, it's new businesses, it's new technologies, it's the social entrepreneurs, it's the social movements, it's all the people who are putting their, I want it to be shoulder to shoulder with the people who are actually solving the problems rather than pointing my finger at what was wrong, because pointing our finger at what's wrong is not gonna, it's absolutely necessary, but it's not gonna fix it. So just I also just, this gets down to, as a human being, I didn't like being in a position day in and day out that constantly was about mistrust rather than trust. I just didn't want to live that way. But it's a terrible problem. I don't know what's gonna, because the best parts of the journalism are the things that are being starved, right? The scarcity. The most important question to ask is always, what is scarce? And the real scary thing is we're drowning in this stuff that's trash, and the scarcity. We have fewer reporters reporting, outside the United States. What's the business model to support the bureau in Baghdad? The things that are actually being destroyed the fastest are the things that we need most as a democracy.
In your work with philanthropy, you said that you would like to be shoulder to shoulder with people who are actually providing the solutions, and a lot of those solutions are really funded by the philanthropic community. And most of those movements in civil society do not have the leverage of Wikipedia, where so little can do so much. It's just an extraordinary thing. In fact, it's so extraordinary that it's really one of still. And so, but the philanthropic community, it seems to me, is like the last century. It's still in the last century. It's not in this century at all. Technologically, it's still sort of moving around and feeling its way. And it's so much about implementation, and implementation is really about not taking a risk. And rapid change is about innovation and failure, for good reason, because only failure can you actually. And so you have a real divide between what's on the ground, I think, in terms of trying to create innovative social models and where the flow of funds are coming from.
That's right. I'm working on it. So are a lot of people. But I think the one thing I would say to be careful about is there is no such thing as philanthropy, right? We have still a minute. There's no such thing as philanthropy. There's a tremendous diversity. And there is actually great hope in the Wikipedia model, I think, for funding. 75% of the money given away in this country is from individuals. And there, I think, are going to be models in the future, much like Obama's campaign, where small amounts of money from a lot of people can fund things, if they can get visible, which goes back, in the circle. I also think there are going to be more and more new philanthropists who are going to do things with the risk-taking way. But it is stuck. I'm working on it. I think my time is up.
Okay.
Take care. Thanks.